in Scotland for the last few years, so he's reintegrated back into society. But just a quick show of hands, who has volunteered with John before at Hard Knock Forest? That's a few of you. You guys have got a good story about it. Is that where you first date?
When Scott first moved to England, that's where I took him for a Valentine's Day.
There you go, John.
Well, that's going to in the next slideshow.
But yeah, over to John.
Right. Yeah, thanks very much, Jack, and thanks to everyone for coming and for hosting this, Josh. Lovely venue. So we've got a bit to go through, so I'll crack on. But this is what I'm going to do tonight, just the kind of what you'd expect, really, from our project. I've been working there since about 2018, but the project is a lot older than that. I'll go into that a bit. Really do encourage, hopefully, I'll get through this in a bit of time at the end for questions and answers. Yeah, prizes, someone's already possibly one joke, but that depends on how the rest of it's going. Sometimes I bottle it. But also, if there's anything, this is very unlikely, but if I say anything that's a bit too technical, then just shout out. It's very unlikely to say anything you can't understand. So, Hard Knock Forest, I'll show you a map of exactly where it is in a minute, but as you're the most local crowd I've ever done, then I think you'll know. But the University of Leeds, a colleague of ours called Dom, he's in the School of Earth and Environment, and Forestry England set up a kind of informal partnership, getting on, well, 20 odd years ago now, because as you'll know if you know the Duddon Valley, sending timber trucks loaded up with the timber from Hard Knock is not an easy ask. So the site lends itself basically much better to restoring itself to native woodland. And when you look at some of these pictures, you say, well, what you're on about, John, is already done. And a lot of it is already happening. That's a big theme of what I'll be talking about tonight, is the power of nature to restore itself with our hands kind of off as much as possible. Another brilliant picture of naturally regenerating woodland, even bluebells and everything in there, so it's beautiful. But obviously it has and still is a conifer plantation, and that's typical of the commercially planted stuff that is going to be felled, harvested, taken away, made into products that we all use. So I do always point out that we're not against commercial forestry, we're not against timber production. How could you be, really, because wood is a brilliant resource. But on this site, as I said earlier, it lends itself better to what's happening to restoring a habitat, and a great place to visit as well. What you can see up here, this whole area here with the scattered, it's all Sitka spruce pretty much. This scattered Sitka spruce there is regenerating from the seed source. So it's not particularly good timber. Our main job, our main kind of task really physically is to get in there and remove all that stuff and allow the native trees, the native woodland to slowly come back in its own time. And again, you can see a typical commercial conifer block, but on this picture, you can't quite see, but there's a line across there, that's the forestry road. And above that line, it's still remaining waiting to be harvested. But below, in the early 2000s, that was all felled, harvested, taken out, and what you can see there is largely birch, but none of it is planted. The project had barely started work when that was felled, and it's all come back because there's brilliant seed sources in the Duddon Valley for native woodland. Everyone at the back hearing me all right? I can project, very good, very good. That's just a nice picture, but there's Heart of Fell, which straddles the Duddon Valley and Eskdale, just to orientate yourself on there. And again, all this in here is naturally regenerating birch, which is an early successional tree, and that's some lovely Scots pine.
Do you find you get Sitka spruce in the birch region as well?
Yeah, it gets everywhere really. I mean, it can be very patchy, and it's to do with what ground conditions. If the ground's bare and you get a load of these tiny little seeds, you get a real thicket. Or you get ones that might hide there for years, and you think, well, that's quite a big tree. I'll get someone with a chainsaw like Jack to sort it out. Which you were doing the other day, so that was a very good question. You knew the answer already. Yeah. Brilliant. If anyone else wants to do that, that's fine. So a quick why, and that's really why are you chopping down trees, as some trees, and letting other trees go. I sense probably a lot of you are quite knowledgeable about this sort of thing anyway, and or have heard me bang on about it before. But to cut a long story short, our wildlife has evolved alongside our habitats, and just as one example, an oak tree, a mature oak tree, been studied a lot, and there's literally thousands of species that can live on an oak tree, everything from bacteria to invertebrates to birds. Then if you get a big mature oak tree that's started to decay and rot, you could have the aforementioned pine martens denning in it, whereas shorter term kind of crops, tree species that are native to North America generally, they don't host anything like as much. So that's the kind of the basis of being a bit selective about what trees we've got there. Not anything against Sitka, but ecologically, native mixed oak, mature oak woodland is the best thing we've got for biodiversity by far, and there's almost none of it. There's almost none of it left. Go into that a bit later as well. So that's where we are, just a satellite view. You can see the conifer blocks, and the rest of it has been felled and is just at various stages of natural regen, or it might be peat bog. Just to orientate us, there's Boot over there, and Cockley Beck at the bottom of Hardknot and Rhinos Pass. So I had a look when I first started this project for any maps I could possibly find that were showing that same site, or approximately, because some of these maps are quite artistic and interpretive. So that's about 1600. You can see they've demarcated, is that a word? Some of these forest woodlands there. Now even by then, most of our native woodland had gone. It's such a brilliant resource. By the time the Romans invaded, the majority of our woodland had gone, because it's very handy, and we developed in the Bronze Age metal tools, axes, burning stuff. It's just a great resource, but we almost use it as if it was infinite, which it could be if we use it properly. So a later map, and these pockets of forest have shrunk again even more. Environmentally or ecologically, you get to the point here where the populations of the wildlife in those little pockets are now fragile, because they may be interbreeding, they may be genetically quite similar to each other, depending on the species. If there was a disastrous event, it could be a fire or just a storm knocking down a lot of the trees, then that could be the end for that little population. And that's basically how extinction happens. It's not in one fell swoop, apart from if you were a dinosaur. It's gradually kind of death by 1,000 cuts. And there's, where's Hard to Fell? There we go, Hard to Fell again. Eskdale, still quite green and forested, but this early OS map shows that there's really nothing much left. Some further down the valley, and there's some really nice triple SI oak woodland further down the Duddon Valley that we're connecting to with our project. Now, imagine that going back up there. So we've got timeline across there, percentage of woodland. If you kind of extrapolate up there, no one really knows thousands of years ago how much of the country was covered in woodland. And by woodland and by covered, it doesn't mean like a big plantation like we used to see it. It would be scattered. 60 or 70% will be a good guess though, because it's a kind of default habitat for our latitude, a sort of temperate rainforest or mixed woodland like we're seeing coming back to Hardknot. So given us not building or chopping everything down, possibly 60-70% would have some kind of woodland. Some of it scrubby, some of it big oaks, but that's a reasonable guesstimate. And you can see what's happened as we've become more and more industrialised. But what happened there is that potentially a really positive upswing of tree cover. I should have said you're allowed to heckle and you're allowed to shout out. I was a teacher for 20 years, I have no fear of any of that. But what happened there?
Pit props. Forestry Commission.
Yeah, someone said pit props as well. That was a big part of this decline. So we had a panic just after the war. Thought, right, we cannot be dependent on timber imports if there's another war. So yeah, most of that is planted. That was the setting up of the Forestry Commission, as they were then called. And that's a kind of another way of showing what we've got. It's going up slowly, our tree cover. Some of it commercial plantations, forestry, and some of it, as we say, hard knot, natural regen. But we're much lower than the European average. We've got a dense population, stands to reason, and then another way of showing the same thing. So it's nice to think ecologically and habitat-wise, we can aspire to certainly a lot more than we've got. A similar thing there. Obviously, it's a higher proportion in Scotland, but even there, a lot of it is planted conifer. This is the interactive bit. Prizes, right? So I've got. Calm down, Jack. Don't just leave him to the front already. He thinks he's going to win. So we've got a lot of camera trap pictures, and some of them are better than others. So I put some of the slightly more obscure ones.
Ooh. Heron.
Aaron, I think. Sorry, I've forgotten your name. No, I wasn't pointing at you. I'll tell you what, you can have it anyway. Now what I've got in here, I should have done this at the beginning as well. Do you remember these a few years ago? A little yellow sticky one, it So, just to encourage you to join in, really. There's 4 more of those. 4 more.
Don't eat it, Chris.
Someone said to me when I was doing this is just stuff you've got left over from when you were a primary teacher. You should probably. Right. So a little timeline. So the end of that graph, as it shot up, 1917, and then Forestry Commission was doing a big land grab. They bought up huge areas of kind of farmland and other land. Including hard knot forest, and hard knot forest was going to be much bigger, which is why it's kind of called hard knot. It doesn't actually reach hard knot, but it was going to be a lot bigger. So we've got a lot of this going on, that picture. What happened in our forest and a lot of other ones, then you've got a sort of 30 or 40 year rotation before you can harvest some decent amount of timber. And when our colleague Dom was in the Duddon Valley, he was there kind of, I think, partly as an environmental science lecturer, but also he used to go there. We rented a place, the Leeds Uni rented a place called Dale Head in the Duddon Valley, and they did lots of outdoor pursuits there. Dom noticed that this was happening, clear felling, and it looks like devastating, it looks like the surface of the moon when you've got clear felled spruce. And he started talking to the Forestry Commission, as they still were then, about what their plans for the site were. They didn't really have any, even though they knew that it wasn't economically viable and it was really difficult to get timber trucks down the Duddon Valley. They have to use a small truck, ferry it down, put it onto a bigger truck. It's just, they don't make any money on it. So Dom, clever as he is, got to work on that and led a lot of work parties there himself whilst doing his job at Leeds Uni, which is an academic environmental scientist. Somewhere in that period I started going on volunteer days and glibly said to Dom, well, how are you going to get this sorted just in a few weekends a year, which is all he could do himself. And we were chopping down Sitka as much as we could, but obviously it's a huge site and it's a huge task. So he cunningly waited for the right moment and gave me the job of doing that. And I was the kind of first, but not the last, proper employee, if I'm a proper employee of that project. And that's me on my first day. Bear in mind I've been a teacher for 20 years, so this was a nice change. So I started organising, managed to organise a lot of regular volunteer events. And a lot of them were quite simply lopping and sawing Sitka down. We do a bit of tree planting and a bit of wildflower planting, more on that later. And we didn't know whether we get people, like the situation Jack's probably in now, you put an event on and does anyone come? Well, they really did. Thanks to a lot of you that have been as well, and a lot of other people over the years. So that's a typical scene, or it was quite typical a few years ago. All of this greenery is the Sitka spruce that's regenning. It carpets the place and it shades out, because it doesn't lose its leaves, it shades out pretty much any ground flora. Not much can live in it. You do get birds nesting in it. You do get small numbers of species of lichen and invertebrates, but it's a tiny fraction of what we could have with our native species. So a lot of what we do, this is kind of the before and after, but the problem with evergreen trees is that they still look like they're there when you've chopped them down. So this is an area that we kind of went through a few years ago, and it's really, can't dress it or do anything fancy, it's just sawing and lopping and it gets the job done. We do plant some trees and we do get volunteers growing a few trees. I picked some up just on my way here tonight from someone that was at my other talk in Gosforth. If you're recognising me, this is the second gig this year in Gosforth. It's like a big tour. But he's grown some oak for us, so I've got those in the boot in my car now. So we plant trees, especially trees that are making their own way back. So there's rarer trees like aspen that we plant. And strangely, there's not much hazel. That's great for squirrels in years to come, so we're planting hazel. We do residential weekends. Jack helped me out with our last one. And that's the Burke Centre in the middle of Hardknot Forest. Absolutely ideal for residentials. And it's great because we can then get people coming from all over the country, whereas our normal volunteer days tend to be more local folk. But that's a great place to stay. Oh, you know what it's Someone said owl?
Tony Owl.
Well, that's tricky because it is an owl, but it's Tony Owl is a better answer. But Pete, you can go for the next one. You'll have another chance. I know you know your stuff. So yeah, can you see that? But it's a bit of a shy one, that one. Loads of school groups coming in as well, which is brilliant, because one thing I wanted to do more of when I was a teacher is get children outside, learning skills, team building. A lot of children just don't like being in classrooms all the time, and there's too much of that in my opinion. So we've got a really long running partnership with Milham School, who are brilliant. They've got a lot of staff that are keen, and that's the key to it. Because once you've got the kids there, there's no problem. So planting little willow cuttings there. Make sure you put them in the right way around. But you see that real focus, it's brilliant. It really works really well. And there you go, that's one of our camera traps that a lot of our wildlife photographs are from. Putting down a few peanuts. Now they look like they're really studious, but I basically said to them, can you do me a picture of you looking really studious? I hadn't asked them a thing, so those two lads are and there's some of you have seen these sort of beanie bags, big group shelters. That was just a little bit of a problem solving activity. I just gave them wrapped up and said, what's that? And set them into two teams. That was before COVID. I haven't dared do that since COVID, but I will get back to it. And we do, a lot of groups are starting to come and ask for tours, a lot of sort of wildlife trusts, National Trust, Friends of the Lake District, John Muir Trust, so it's great to be able to go to take groups round. And you always get some really good questions, especially from people that are in our profession, see things from a different perspective, ask us what we're doing, why. Some of you have been on some of our outreach days, back walks and things. We do pretty much every spring we do a kind of bird call related one, looking for signs of birds. Is that you? Camera trap day.
Oh, you know that.
Yeah, so got a little photo exhibition as well, which I've toured around a few libraries and things. So I think that's important as well, to try and kind of break out of kind of people who already know what's going on and introduce other people to it. And I definitely need to mention these two, Jess and John, who started work with us about 3 years ago. Absolutely brilliant people to work with. And the reason these photographs are so good is because we actually had a photographer come and do a project on, I think it's portraits of the forest, that he's doing lots of cool photographs of people that work in the outdoors and forestry. and that's some just general ones of us at work. Bit of chainsawing going on, we've all got chainsaw tickets. Hinksy built that donations cairn, gets a few £100 a year. Drive to work over Birkfell. This one is, it always reminds me of Ghostbusters, but it's electro fishing when you do a fish count by doing a little very low voltage electrical current, and it stuns them and you count them.
What's the population of the mass? Was it like a study you were doing?
Yeah, you'd have to look at the Rivers Trust data, which I think a lot of it is on their website. So yeah, we were just contributing. So Hannah there is the person that was organising it. We just fancied a day doing something else. So you can ask me any question about that, but I won't know the answer. But it's mainly eels and a few trout. But the Duddon is one, and its tributaries is one of the cleaner, better rivers that we have, which is great. That is actually up the road at Mightdale, starting off the project, doing a bit of emergency fence capping.
Oh.
Jack.
No.
No, you love that. I don't even know if you can still get them anymore. Probably been banned. So it's a little oak sapling in tree tube. Definitely. Oh, straight away a wolf. So, it's not a wolf. But when I did get that camera trap back and looked at it, I had a moment before it accidentally. So, anyone need to ask anything now? I'm going too fast, too slow? What time is it? But I'm going all right. It's half past.
What was the fence for before you were building?
The one that Hinksy was knocking.
Yeah.
It was just in between. Well, Jack can answer that. I don't need to go back to that one. That's in between the Grays land, the common, I suppose it would have been, and another Forestry England site that Jack is now sorting out. We can go into that later.
Can I ask a question? So, how do you sort of plan what you're going to do and give yourself a time scale, or is it just that things evolve as you start a
Bit
project?
of both, really. I mean, when we started at Hard Knot, it was painfully obvious that there was acres and acres of really dense Sitka spruce that if we didn't get them while they were that height, they'd be up here. So really, every volunteer day that I was running was that, and we had chainsaw contractors in, and we still do, taking out the bigger stuff. And staff have all got chainsaw ticket, taking out the kind of in between. So that was the priority, because if you leave that, then you've got a bigger job. And since then, we've been able to sort of allow ourselves a bit more breathing space and do a bit of tree planting. But it has. I'm very sort of opportunistic about it. So if people get in touch and they're keen, and schools are a good example, then we'll just generally say yes to everything. And pretty much at the moment, we're all full on with it. We can't fit much more in at the moment unless we get some more people. But we've got a grand plan of when we think we'll be largely pretty much free of non-native trees. There or thereabouts, but 15 years. But there's no end point because it's a process-led thing. So at the moment, we've got a very birch-dominated woodland, but 70 years' time, it'll be probably a lot of it'll be oak-dominated. And even that isn't an end point because there isn't really an end point with landscape recovery and landscape change. So, right, so practical conservation, we're looking at a fence just a minute ago. This is actually a holly that I didn't know till whenever I started this job, 2018, that holly is very palatable to deer and sheep. And back then we had a lot of sheep in grass because the site had not been really that carefully or intentionally staffed or managed. Forestry England didn't have loads of time to go around hoying sheep out very much. But once we started working there, we got to know the farmers. We got to repairing gaps, redoing the fences. The sheep are out. So what we've got left, of course, is 2 species of native deer, which we do want. We're not going to fence them out at all. But we want them at a level where we'll get things regenerating. And holly's a really good indicator species. You can see several holly in Hard Knot, a kind of lovely little topiary spherical shape. because the deer will just go around, take all the new soft bits of growth. Then you can see at some point they've just sent up a leader, and you get like a really tall holly. And once it's above deer browsing height, then it'll establish itself. But it's just a balance, really. You don't want so many deer that everything stays down at knee height, but you don't want no deer. And that's an example where we've just used a load of the old chopped down Sitka spruce to put round this holly, and it's been able to put on a growth spurt. And that stuff just kind of rots down. It's not like a tree tube that you need to remove. It's not plastic, and it's doing a good job. That's a bigger version of that I did with the Duke of Edinburgh award group. Just literally the stuff that's left over. Brash is just like woody debris left over when you've harvested your forest. And it's a good little project that for a group. Deer management, and management is a euphemism for just culling them with a high-powered rifle. We'll call it management. But anyway, let's explain that's what it is. So, not maybe everybody's favourite idea of conservation, but there's no predators left for deer. So it's also actually to keep the population at a more sustainable level is better for them. They don't run out of food. Places in Scotland, you'll find deer starving because they're kind of eating themselves out of house and home. This is an oak tree that it's put on this weird growth because it's been browsed by deer, but it's also got above deer browsing height. So that's absolutely fine to have these slightly strange looking trees. It's very natural. It's never going to be a brilliant tree for making into timber and planks or anything. It's just the tree's going to be good habitat, and it's food for deer and everything else. So yeah, quite a lot of this goes on. Mostly not by me. Here's a little, don't do this very often, but taking off this girdle of bark around a tree. This is a larch, so it's another non-native tree. That will allow it to still stand, but it'll die off, and it's one of the best habitats you can create, standing dead wood, because it'll host so many invertebrates as well as fungi, and then it'll just fall down and rot into the soil. So you often see woodpeckers will start going over to those, or birds of prey will use the top as a perch. And we do have a group of people that are growing on trees from they collect seeds, both trees and wildflowers. That is, I think I've not got any more quiz questions, but if you call out what that is, I'm prepared to give away. No, not you.
Juniper.
Juniper.
Don't give him another one.
No.
Don't.
You can pass it on.
No, somebody else.
Well, I'll leave it. Yeah, it's juniper. One of our only 3 native conifers that we've got. It's very, very rare. It's kind of suffered from our land management, really, and also it's got a fungal disease that's killed off quite a lot of some parts of the country. This one's got berries on, and I set myself the challenge of propagating from juniper. It's pretty tricky. You've got to crush those, you've got to treat them with a kind of mild acid, which I think mimics what a bird's digestive system would do. Because seeds have got, well, lots of seeds have got a chemical dormancy that needs breaking, and they've got like a thermal temperature dormancy, so that's why they need to be out over the winter, and then they think, right, it's time to grow in spring. Sowed all those. Oh. The punchline of that is that I brought a little friend in tonight. So that's one of those, don't know which one, sorry. There's all your children. But that's taken 3 years. This is why these are really expensive from a plant nursery, because you've got to tend them for 3 years. Well, more like 6 years probably. But they're really rare. They're a kind of upland, high altitude type species. They grow very kind of flat to the ground up high. The berries feed species like ring ouzel and other thrushes that are quite rare. So this was an area, grass guards part of our site, which had been planted up in the 80s with conifer. Then the legislation, the law on planting on peat changed, because forestry is always kind of getting higher standards, especially environmentally. So they had dug some drains in this bog. It seems crazy now because it's like really nice peatland, dead thick peat, like 1.5 meters, some of it. And they dug drains in it so that it was suitable for growing trees. But we got them to remediate that. So we identified all these drains, quite overgrown there, but they were quite deep as well. And how they do it is by creating these big plugs of peat just from the side of it and blocking every few metres, blocking this drain up. One of these is a video, but I'm not sure it's obvious which one.
That one.
So it was just a couple of days' work for this guy in his digger to block these drains, and the effect is immediate. The water table just starts to rise straight away, which means it's wet enough to carry on forming peat. I think it's what, 1 millimetre a year, so we'll monitor that in 100 years. But it also, this is a bit of a side sort of issue, but it created these lovely little ponds. Straight away were colonised by frogs, desperate for habitat, so that was a good win. Some of the large areas of woodland, of Sitka spruce region, they're just too big for us to go in with hand tools and volunteers, or even too big a scale for us to go in with chainsaws. So we've identified some of these areas, and either Forestry England or ourselves have paid for contractors to go in. That's just a map of the area that we identified, and just get these guys in with chainsaws, and we just want to see that really. That all rots away. None of it, unfortunately, is any use, or no one will even come and take it as chip. So we're just bashing away at that. That's what we need to see, is a really clean stump without anything that will grow off it.
Could you this the festive thing? Could you sell them as Christmas trees?
If we did that, we'd kind of need to manage it, and then someone would have to be on site, and it's probably not economic. And it does cause a bit of an issue. Well, also, I doubt Forestry England would want us to, because they sell them at Grindsdale and Minlaton. I mean, one year I did have a nice little Christmas tree, but
They drop the needles really bad as well, don't
yeah,
they?
they're not really Christmas trees. They're not the kind of classic.
Yeah, but it's cheese.
Oh, there is one there.
Volunteers over
Oh, this is a tricky one. This might be worth 2 little yellow men, especially if you get both species. So that's very distinctive, kind of scalloped edge to this rare tree. No, I'm going to have a
Aspen.
Aspen, yeah. So a lot of people think aspen's just a North American species, but we've got our own aspen, and it's favourite of beavers. And the other species, for a bonus, not a bull rush, just a soft rush, like Juncus, something or other. So we do a bit of sciencey stuff as well. One of the easiest ways to monitor is just these fixed point photographs, and it'll show us. This is a good one. It'll show us what's happening. And again, this is without us really intervening. So that's a really early volunteer group plucking out little Sitka spruce. And bear in mind, we haven't planted anything in there. We just go back, fixed point photo on the GPS. And that's really, really encouraging. So if nothing else, that is pretty powerful. To kind of quantify that, having access to a load of students from Leeds helps. So we set up a lot of 1 kilometre transects, or just walks, straight line walks through the site, looking at just at the natural region, what we're getting, the height, the species, a little bit about what's growing on the ground as well, tagging some of these. There's Dom. So this is one of Dom's PhD students. So this was a repeat study. We did it about 3 years ago. Before that, we'd done it 10 years before. So a lot of these trees that we're now looking through, counting, going through, were tiny little Sitka spruce there. But the idea was that we repeat this study, so we definitely had to go right through on the same track. And I couldn't do it because I was holding the other end of the statement, so I had to send Callum in. That's it. I mean, it's not that funny because I never saw him again, and I had to write to his parents. So that's what we found. He's in there somewhere still. Nothing, I guess, too counterintuitive from all these things. You know, seed source matters. They grow faster when it's lower, it's warmer there, better soil generally. But this was a good figure that really blows people away. So 3,000 stems per hectare. You need to know what a hectare is, which is 100 metres by 100 metres. So not a huge area. So that's an average figure that you're getting 3,000. That's just the native trees. We didn't even bother counting the spruce. Now they don't all survive to maturity, but that's the kind of density that you need to establish. And that's a bit of a breakdown of that. Starting off mainly birch, that's the pioneer species that just gets going straight away. So that was really encouraging, and also just puts a bit more meat on the bones of what's happening. Some of the other stuff we monitor, we'll go into that later if anyone wants to ask anything specific. These are some little plots of aspen trees that I mentioned earlier. They're very palatable to deer. So half of these plots have got fence around, half of them haven't. We can see what's happening with the deer and whether they're surviving. We've also got other batches of trees that are marked on this map that we go back and look at a couple of times a year, different species. We've got these little adder walks that we've done. Really proud to have a good population of adders, given that they're extinct from a lot of counties in England. There's a beauty. And that's how you monitor them. You put down these little refuges, and they're supposed to crawl under them, but we generally see them anyway. That if you've been on any of our days, volunteer days, then your work's on here. We've got planting areas and cleared areas. These are just the two walks that we do weekly throughout April to August for butterfly monitoring. We've kind of got a breakdown of the habitat, which we keep updating as well. And in the future, like I said, we're looking at more planting upland trees like the juniper, wildflower species. The wildflowers tend to be pretty absent because the years of grazing that was happening at Hardknott before it was forestry, the sheep have just kind of selectively grazed out the good stuff, the wildflowers, so that's a volunteer day. All of these grown by our volunteers. We buy some in as well. And that is another really encouraging photograph because that ragged robin there wasn't there the year before. We'd grown and planted it, and we went back to collect seed from it, passed it on to the volunteers again. So a virtuous circle, I think that's called. This is a bit of a historic one for Jack. That's our first meeting with Forestry England at Miterdale. And we had, this was years ago, this picture, we had this little inkling of an idea that we could run a project at Miterdale. Reintroductions is another more ambitious thing we're doing. This was over at Kielder with a water vole. They've had a successful reintroduction of water voles. Used to be one of our most common mammals. Really important part of the food chain, but as you probably know, habitat loss and American mink have done away with them. Pine martens, now when I did this talk last time, there was maybe 1 or 2 pine martens in Cumbria, and now we've added another 13, more to come next year. So this is one of the Scottish ones. We went up there, right in the far north. First of all, a month monitoring them to check the population was strong enough to then trap and release them down here, all done under licence. That egg's too big, isn't it? That's cruelty, I think. But again, they were incredibly common. We've got a marked crag at Hardknott, which is where pine martens would have denned. It's on the map. An old English name for pine marten is marked. If you like looking at droppings, then get yourself involved in a project like this. Very distinctive pine marten droppings. So that, obviously, that's sort of beetles, maybe small mammals. That's more vegetable matter, or it could even be peanuts from a garden feeder. They say you can't polish a turd. That was a joke. Didn't bottle it, was it? We did a lot of, I met some of you people at these meetings we did some drop-ins. The reintroduction needs to be taken seriously because people can be very reluctant with change in general, but also when it is a carnivore, people want to know about the impact. But it's important to know that they were here in huge numbers until, well, we gradually we eliminated them. But that was at Estelle Village Hall. And something else we're really proud of that we're part of in the Duddon Valley is that we're now working with 6 farmers and 2 private landowners to this DEFRA-funded landscape recovery, where payments are made to farmers and landowners for, well, the more ambitious you are with nature recovery, basically the more you will get for what you're doing on your land. And that's hard to fail. Already the farmer has removed his sheep from there, and well, with the combination of planting and natural regen, we'll get really a kind of one of the first examples of high altitude, scrubby sort of montane woodland coming in there. And a lot of peat restoration here. These are little tree exposures that we hope to link up. So loads going on there. And I think the best part really is the partnership that we've got with the farmers, with the landowners, with all the other organisations like the Rivers Trust and Forestry England, just pitching in because there's so much potential. Time's right for it. And that's a couple of farmers, myself, having a wander around, making some plans. It all takes a bit of funding, so I do like to give thanks to our funders. Won't mention them all, but particularly proud of that one because that was me right to more than one. I was sitting drinking a can of beer and thought, oh, they say they donate money, and they did, without even a form to be filled in. So that's me there. What you'll know if you've been on any kind of ecological site tours, nature reserves, you nearly always get a bloke pointing. Often he's got a beard. I don't know why, but that's for using a tree stake. I've just gone back just to revert to the hand there. So I look at my colleagues, not interested. That's the historical one again. Yeah, that's Ollie, he used to work at Markdale. There's Dom, our Guru Visionary founder. That's actually up at Carifan if anyone's been there. Some of their little montane willow, we'll have some of those. Don't try and find any reason for this bit, I like doing it. That you can point at rivers. Point at paths. That's a special path with like sheep wool underneath. Now there's Hinksy at Hard Knot, pointing that tree. What's he looking at? I can hear you ask. What's that? Make it a bit bigger, okay. What's that?
Frog spawn.
Yeah? Well, it's called star jelly. And it's the gel inside the frog. The frog's been eaten, it expands in whatever crow or buzzard's stomach, and it regurgitates it. So there's no eggs in it, but yeah, star jelly. But it used to be thought of, some kind of mythical stuff, but star jelly. And our guru.
Is that you?
Does anyone know who that is? Because this doesn't know his work either.
Is it?
Yes, from the Fast Show. Dave Angel, Eco-Worry. Right, back to some. Really just for my benefit. So, from the wildlife cameras, the trail cameras, set them up. You've usually got about half a dozen on site. No more prizes, but you can feel free to shout out. It's an otter. Weird. Great spotted woodpecker. So this is what it's kind of all about for me, is that we've got all this brilliant wildlife, just doesn't know what we're doing or why we're restoring a site, but it's benefiting from it. It's pretty good photograph. That's not from a camera trap because they need like a warm-bodied, warm-blooded creature. Red deer, posing. Small pearl-bordered fritillary, or I hope it is, because that's what I tell everyone. Leaping stoat. Oh, this is a video. Snuffling badger. Go. So we often see in the fields and in this bit of woodland, kind of, they're really powerful. They will kind of dig stuff over, almost like a little pig. And there's lots and lots of more of these videos on our YouTube channel. And also a video that Jack made, the latest one. What's this video as well?
In the bottom.
Yeah. So this is a cool one because you can't see everything that's on there
No.
until it's paused. Until it's moved rather. So yeah, 1, 2, there's another one, 3. And that's a species of bird that likes just sort of wet woodland, woodcock. There's resident birds and some come over sort of winter to just overwinter here in Russia. What's that? Very important species. Wood ants. Got loads of those, we're mapping those nests. Photo bobbing robin. Red squirrel. And so I've got a little summary just to make it look as if I've thought about this ending. This is symbolic of natural processes. Really we want nature to do the work. And that jay, well any jay, not just that one, they'll gather loads of acorns in autumn, and to try and get them through to when there's more food available, they go around burying thousands of them. 3,000 it can be. And the ones that is, pictures, this is the summary. It's probably more entertaining. I'm nearly done. Yeah, so they're natural kind of oak planting vector. But we do need to kind of give nature a helping hand by creating a level playing field, getting rid of these non-native species. And really it's got to be fun as well, in my opinion. So great people work on our project. We enjoy what we do. We may or may not save the world, I can't guarantee that. But we kind of go down fighting and we'll enjoy the time we have there, and we end up in the new field then afterwards sometimes. So keep in touch any of these ways if you want, or ask me, or sign up for the newsletter. And see you on whenever you want, really. So that's it, that's me.
Any questions?
Was that a recent picture of a red squirrel?
A couple of years ago, I think, Chris. We still see them occasionally. Yeah, are you wondering whether we're getting more or less over time?
Yeah,
or?
Oh, greys, yeah, penny greys.
Yeah, and the last few years have been pretty good for grey. Wait, when you get a good year for reds, it's also good for greys, I think. And it seems from hearing what some of the squirrel groups are saying that there's more concern about greys at the moment than there has been for a few years. So we need to tackle that in any way. To have any chance of kind of tipping the balance, there's got to be working on habitat and culling, and could be that pine martins will help tip that as well. Yes, at the back.
I missed a little bit about the pine martins. Do we actually have, at this moment in time, pine martins in your forest and the Hardknot?
They're not in our forest as yet. The release site was down near Grisdale Forest and on the Graithwaite estate, which is a private estate. And the ones that we took from Scotland got released down there. But we know they can travel miles and miles and miles to find a new territory. So 2 weeks time, I think we're setting up some more camera traps, bait them, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have already got pine martins there. if not now, then in the next few years, as they start to breed as well. And some of the ones we brought down from Scotland might already have been pregnant, and so we've kind of got good value for money out of those. Yeah. Yeah.
How long can you plan forward? Is it due to funding? You must get like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? You must get quite ambitious.
Yeah. Yeah, so a question about how far we can plan ahead with funding. We've not ever really been more than 2 years ahead of ourselves with money, but this landscape recovery is going to part fund our work.
Okay.
And that, as far as you can guarantee anything with kind of government initiatives, that's a 20-year block of time that they want this to happen. So that's the most kind of comfortable, if you like, we've been. But we've always just carried on as if we're just going to get funded, because you may as well. So we're just assuming that everything will work out, and it has done so far. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any connection with the national park? Because you mentioned the Lake District National Park.
They kind of know what we're doing, and there's a couple of them that have been on site tours with us.
Is it in the national park?
Yeah. And they did a little write-up of us in kind of their environmental strategy. So yeah, they're very hands-off really with this sort of thing, but they're really interested in landscape recovery now that we're part of that. I don't know if we're really on their radar, because we don't tend to do lots of publicity. We just kind of get on with things. So I guess there's a kind of a benevolent interest, but I think they're more interested now that a lot more farms are involved, that are kind of, they're not doing the same thing as Hard Knot, but they are part of a kind of real interesting potential historical sort of change, really. Any more hands? Yeah.
The ring barking that you're doing on
Yeah.
the larch,
Yeah.
is that like really effective? Could you not do that instead of cutting down all the thicker spruce? It
It's
looks
just,
like it would be quicker.
yeah, it's just very time consuming.
All right.
So when you've got a lot to deal with, the kind of just the cutting down, and also there aren't that many trees of the right size. Kind of
Right.
the little stuff that we're taking on volunteer days, it's not worth ring barking some piddly little thing.
Yeah, but like your bigger ones, is
Yeah,
it not quicker
yeah,
than
yeah.
cutting them all down?
It's just, yeah, I mean, it's just very time consuming, and I guess we do need to kind of be efficient about removing, especially the Sitka. But no, you're right, I mean, some projects have done massive scale ring barking, but it does kind of look a bit weird when you get massive stands of dead trees. And you can't just do it anywhere, you can't do it where there's footpaths and bridleways, because you're creating a very weak tree that'll go down.
I was just thinking, because like people that don't have a chainsaw ticket, like could volunteers do that?
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
a volunteer activity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially during bird nesting season when we can't chop down trees that size,
Yeah.
in case it's got a bird in.
Yeah.
So it's ideal then, because they'll kind of be annoyed with us for a few minutes, they'll pollute it, but then we'll go away, the tree's still there for a few more years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd like to do more of it, and it is a kind of seasonal one. Yeah.
Do you think the plantations, having been a plantation for such a long time, has affected the pH of the soil, and does that affect any of the work going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I know loads about, but
Yeah.
it does make it slightly more acidic.
Yeah.
And when you fell an area, you do get a kind of slightly acidic flush through the kind of felled area with all those extra needles and stuff. But I think it recovers quite quickly.
It's not that you don't think it's impacted any of your trees?
No, I really don't think so, because I think the conditions of the soil there are naturally slightly acidic.
Yeah.
So the plants that are there are adapted well enough to that. And I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference, to be honest. Yeah, that's a good question now.
How do aspens regenerate? Because I thought they can produce another aspen some distance away.
Yeah, they regenerate in two ways. So one of them is, as you say, they'll regenerate from their own roots. So they'll send out the kind of just the normal root plate. They'll send up little baby aspens, clones, intervals. I mean, they can be 30, 40 metres away from the parent tree sometimes. So you'll get this kind of cloned, genetically identical stand of aspen. Or they will reproduce sexually. There's males and female trees, and so they will set seed, but no one really knows why that doesn't seem to happen very readily. in this country. One of the reasons is that it's very rare. So if it's kind of you're not going to meet your ideal partner if they're 10 miles away. So a lot of what happens is they do this vegetative reproduction rather than the male and female. Yeah. Did you have a question as well? Sorry?
Yeah. So back to the pine martens real quick. When you release them, are you releasing them, the ones that you have released, like freely, or do you guys like the trackers on them? And
Yeah,
see
they've
what
got.
they're-
I think it was a condition of the license to track them in some way. So they have like a radio collar that's designed to kind of fall off within a couple of years. So I think it's made of a kind of soft leather, so it'll biodegrade after a couple of years. It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not a nice thing to do, but like I said, I think we have to make sure we can track them in case there's a problem. I don't know what problem we'll be able to solve.
How many did you actually take from Scotland then?
13.
And left them with 17? You said it was the start.
30 over 2 years. Sorry, yeah, I probably didn't explain that very well. We're going back next year.
Yeah.
And you get a license that says you can take up to 15 and then another up to 15. But you do need to get pretty close to 50 because 30 is the kind of genetically diverse enough of a population for them to breed amongst themselves. Yeah. And the couple that may have already been in Cumbria help as well, because there were sightings around Grisdale, just a couple.
Do you have to give a certain distance between where you release them from, like? Is it?
Yeah, we were talking about that yesterday actually, because it might not matter because they tend to find their own territory and they're very mobile. So you could probably put them all in exactly the same place, which is not ideal. But we're thinking that next time we might change where we put them. But there was 2 release sites. There was Grisdale Forest and there was the Graithwaite Estate, which are kind of close to each other. I don't think that will be a problem.
So I was swimming in the Dublin 3 years ago, and I saw a pine marten. Is that likely?
I'd be very surprised, but you can never say never. With anything to do with nature, you can never say never. But I wouldn't be amazed. I mean, we've heard stories like that, but often there's other mustelid species like, well, it could even be a mink, because they're kind of similar. They're dark, and if it's in a river, it's probably a mink, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the big cat of Cumbria?
I've sworn secrecy. I don't have you. Have you got a tail?
A couple times, It's something big that I didn't know what it was, but it looked like a cat for sure. But
yeah. I mean, again, like there's people kind of let all sorts of stuff go, don't they? So. Chris?
I'm just really, have you received more money from Monkshead Beer than you spent on that?
Yeah, no. But if anyone does want to buy beer from supermarket, Northern Monk, they're really good actually. Nice beer.
Yeah. You can tell Chris doesn't drink them because he calls them Monk's Head.
Any other questions?
How much involvement do the Leeds have on like the academic side?
Well, the last major one was that studio show where we lost Callum.
Yeah.
So a bit embarrassing. No, seriously though, have you met Ben yet? There's a researcher called Ben, and he's doing some field work on temperature, the effect canopy cover has on temperature. So we had a couple of heat waves the year before last, was it? Really interesting. He had all these thermal kind of probes dotted around Hard Knot, and I mean, obviously it's not surprising, but the amount that tree cover regulates temperature, whether it's cold or warm, is amazing. So that's kind of another argument for trees in cities, isn't it? But also to regulate climate, because there's salmon spawning issues because the climate's warming so much they're struggling with the temperature in rivers, and if you've got tree cover, that keeps the water a lot cooler. But yeah, a lot of species are stuff. You know, invertebrates can be quite fragile depending on the species, so it's all good now. That's what's going on at the moment. There's lots of other potential. Soil carbon was one that we started researching, but think that the PhD student moved away, so that was going to be really good, looking at the uptake of carbon in the soil. So yeah, probably not as much as you'd think, but it's handy to have that. So I mean, Dom obviously is really good at advising us on the monitoring and research, but in terms of kind of a big study, then it was that one a few years ago where we got our 3,000 trees per hectare figure.
A bit of a different question. Do you have any like historical, like Iron Age or Neolithic archaeological sites? Because there is on the other side. On
There's very few in Hardknott itself, or very little. I don't think there's anything that's kind of notifiable, is that the term? But in one of the, I can't show you the map now, but one of the other farms that just put a bit of his grazing land in, what's it called? I'll have to find the map and tell you later, but there's some Iron Age remains on top of it. Can't remember what it's called. I think I've kind of run out of words, so you're going to get absolutely
Castle Crag was in that talk.
That was it,
wasn't it? Was it Castle Crag?
Oh, Castle Crag was on there, wasn't it?
It was on Steve.
Sorry, I was thinking of the one already, but yeah, you mentioned that was Castle Crag.
Yeah.
Well, should we say a big thank you?
Yeah.